And hi, welcome back to National First Responder Day. And I am with the great Pete Melfi with 904 Now Facebook Live page. And my name is Ann McCullis Johnson, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker and also a proud Army vet. So, what we're doing today is we're really talking about First Responder Project, and it's a fundraiser for us. So I'd like to put in that plug. And you can go to our website at frp.org or firstresponderproject.org. I was getting the bad sign. So please go and see what we're all about. Myself and Tracy Himanowski, who is a clinical psychologist and a Navy vet. So what we've been doing today is really talking with our first responders and asking the community to get to know them and some of their issues and challenges. But remember, folks, these are the guys, and I use that, as a general nomenclature. These are the folks that protect us out there. On our roads, in our neighborhoods. They do a whole lot more than just, walk us across the street and get cats out of trees. And we've had some wonderful folks today in the morning segment. But tonight, we're really going to switch it up, and we're going to talk to our very own Kendall Hardwick, who is she's a nurse with our great St. John's School District, and has been battling COVID for these many months, and so that keeps her busy during the day. She's also married for 29 years to Sheriff-elected Rob Hardwick, soon to take the reins of St. John's County Sheriff. And she also is the proud mother of a National Guard soldier who we affectionately call a rotorhead. He's a helicopter guy. And she's going to become a mother-in-law for the first time. So I know Tracy's going to give me the boot. But Kendall, with your experience having had a husband deployed twice and a husband who has been integral in the law enforcement, and your knowledge of the First Responder Project, Tracy and I would like to hear if you had like a wish list of programs that we could provide for the families and children of our first responders. What do you think that would include?
Oh, well, being from let's just start with the military side of it. Definitely a family support group for all family or for all first responders in their professions, because outside of the profession, it's hard to understand what the first responders do, what they deal with, and also what the family members are dealing with at home while we're waiting for them to return home, or we're worried about what they're doing while they're out there. So the family support is huge. I think the First Responders Project, reaching out and breaking the stigma, that's huge. Getting these, not just the first responders, but the families to speak as well, because oftentimes we do not talk about the things that we experience as a family, and they don't talk about the things they experience in the line of duty.
So, I think we've talked about doing retreats.
Retreats are huge.
Yeah, and just getting the model that we're looking at is, which we've been doing this for about 7 or 8 years, but really getting the first responder and a support person, and normally that shakes out to be a significant other or a spouse, and getting them to reconnect. I think that's one of the big things. And if you could talk about that when, say, Rob would come home and transition to home, were there things that you did or didn't do to reconnect for family time?
Um, a lot of times what we do is we bury what we're really feeling. Um, there's a lot of inner anxiety that's created throughout their career when they leave to do their job. You still have to go on. You have to put the front on. Everything's okay at home. And then when they come home, we want to hear about their day, but they don't want to talk about their day. And you, so you, there's a lot of juggling of emotions that go on. Um, but I will say though, with Rob and I, we were very blessed early on to find that balance. And that's key to success, a successful marriage in this career. Um, we learned to adapt and overcome maybe the challenges we both faced. And we just created a really strong core family unit.
Um, did you see, as the boys were growing up, um, were they um, some of the challenges that they faced as kids of a law enforcement officer?
Well, I mean, the main challenges they faced were the maybe him, their dad missing major milestones or events in their life. He was deployed overseas for a couple tours, and that took him away from us for probably it was about 14, 15 months in one stretch, and other times as well. So there was so much that they missed out on and he missed out on. But also, when you're younger, it's cool that your dad is in law enforcement, but when you're older, not so much. So, those are some of the small challenges they faced. They still had the anxiety of, is my dad going to come home, or is something going to happen to him? Will he be hurt in the line of duty, or while he's deployed? So, they had a lot of anxieties that they had to, or the challenges they had to overcome, or probably a lot of fear of the unknown.
Um, given given that, and Tracy and I, as we build First Responder Project and focus on the family, what would you envision? What would a program or something for children might look like?
Wow. I mean, family. I mean, gosh, just that's a tough one for me to, because we've always just in the family here been so fortunate to just create our own sense of stability. But for children to get together and maybe share their experiences and be able to talk openly with each other about what they face, what they maybe don't share with their parents, that would be huge. Any type of retreat that kids could get together, law enforcement families, first responder families, military families, and be able to talk openly with each other and share their experiences, that would be really good.
Yeah, so designing a retreat around age specific.
Age specific.
Yeah, putting teenagers and 4-year-olds together is probably not the best combination. um, you've been doing this for a while, and you've seen Rob's responsibilities grow and change, and the two of you are going to be taking a big change here, probably in the next month or so.
Yes.
If you could talk to your younger self, or somebody that's marrying into a first responder family, what kind of wisdom, guidance can you provide?
Um, is to be open and honest, because I'll tell you, early on, I didn't realize what I was doing. I would isolate myself um, pretty much from anyone outside of the family or the profession. I didn't realize that I was doing that, but I didn't want to be judged for, or, let people down for missing events, things that they scheduled, or, maybe a dinner that somebody had invited us to, and we had to cancel last minute because of his job. It was easier to find people within the profession, families that knew what we were doing. So don't isolate, let others in. And I became good at hiding my own feelings. And so finding somebody or an outlet is really good. It took me years to figure that out. Like, I had a lot of inner anxiety, but I created that myself. So finding those outlets and finding those groups and the peer groups, like First Responders Project, this is going to be huge for people, to be able to open up and express their feelings, and what it's like to live in a family with a law enforcement officer or military personnel or any type of first responder.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like you get an introduction to being a law enforcement spouse class, like we used to do with the military.
Correct.
How to be a good officer's wife. No. No. So, I think that's great advice, that, and striking a balance between,
yes.
Not just staying with the blue community or the red community, but getting out and having friends, colleagues from, like, the community.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what
Absolutely.
what were some of the things that you did to help with the anxiety? Positive things, not overeating or storing the Halloween candy in the freezer and.
Listen, I was so fortunate with my family. Truly, we just have an amazing family. I relied a lot on them, so my mom was amazing. She just was always there. And so I reached out, and within the family, though,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't let people in because, I don't know, I just didn't. But, within the family, they knew what was going on, and that was my core support.
Well, and that strong support system.
Absolutely.
We kind of touched on some financial concerns today. With I think Carlos Avalos was talking about that oftentimes, like fire and police folks, are not the highest paid people.
Really?
Yeah,
I
that's what
didn't
I
know
heard.
that.
I did hear that, and often work, numerous jobs at
Yep.
the expense of, and I use that word expense on purpose, of the family.
Yes.
Um,
Yes. So, yes, they do not go into this profession for the money. And Rob did work two jobs. When we were younger, he was in law enforcement, and then he went and fenced after work. He would get off, or he would adjust his schedule so that he could work for the family, and put up fences and earn extra money. And so, no, they don't go into this for the money. They go into it for the love of people, to
yeah,
serve the community. Truly, they do.
yeah.
They have a servant's heart.
Well, we are certainly looking forward to hearing more from you in the days to come, and as this shift change. And I hope, for your sake, that COVID maybe goes away, and maybe we're not behind plastic and masks
I know.
for the very near future. But I want to thank you, Kendall, for sharing with us and supporting the First Responder Project. And as we,
Absolutely.
move forward, if you could be an advocate for, these retreats, because we'd really like to get this kicked off in 2021.
You know, I'm behind it
I
100%.
know.
I know it's, the First Responders Project is going to be huge for the families.
Yeah.
I truly believe that this is you guys are moving in the right direction and doing exactly what we need.
Well, thank you so much, and have a great evening. And
Thank you.
remember to save the Halloween candy.
You know it.
Okay.
Nice talking with you.
All right. Good night.
Good night.
I can. Oh. Yeah. Yeah. So again, you've heard from the family about how important it is to. I think Kendall said that she was isolating, and that can go both ways. We heard that very much today, and trying to make that transition from work or duty to home. And I know that our next guest, who we're very fortunate to have here, is Debbie Smith, and it's Lieutenant Debbie Smith.
Yes,
And for those of you, that pick up the phone, what do we teach our kiddos from a very early age? If something's going wrong, who do we call? Not Ghostbusters, but 911. And there's a whole group of folks that handle these 911 calls, and they do a Herculean's job. I got that right. So anyway, but if you really think about first responders, our dispatch and communications folks are truly our first responders. We ask a lot of them, and I don't know that the community knows a whole lot about what they do. So, Debbie and I know Tracy will, chime in as well. But if you could help educate us and the community about what you do and how important it is when that call comes in.
Well, what a 911 telecommunicator does basically is they answer the phone on somebody's worst day. They take information for very serious calls, for some not so serious calls. They dispatch officers to, or fire rescue. Where I work is just law enforcement, so we only dispatch officers. They not only do all that, but they're watching traffic cameras. They're monitoring GPS ankle bracelets. They're monitoring the movements of violators. They're handling LPRs. They're handling all kinds of other things at the same time that they're answering these 911 calls and talking to people who are either screaming or crying or calling about a barking dog. That's basically what we do in a day.
It sounds like a lot of multitasking.
Very much so.
Yeah. And I would suspect, I'm going to go out on a limb here, but I think most of our dispatchers are probably women because our brains can handle that multitasking.
Yes, I'd say probably 90% of our workforce is women. I think we only have 5 or 6 men in my agency alone, out of 50. So,
can you tell us a little bit about your background, because I think it's important for folks to know.
My background is by way of New York. I was an emergency medical technician in New York before moving to Florida in 2004. I did that for almost 6 years. I was there for the events of 9/11 and ended up wanting to move out of New York to get away from all the negativity that was surrounded up there. Came down here and was trying to have children, so I decided to go inside and be a dispatcher. It was probably the best career decision I have ever made in my life because it is the best job ever. You're literally helping people. Even if it is just a simple question of, I can't find my car, can you help me? I mean, you literally have just helped a person.
And I think that's, apparent throughout our community of first responders, and, that willingness to want to serve and not, it's that selfless service.
Yes, ma'am.
And I think that, when we think about our dispatchers and comm folks, what are some of the challenges that you face on a daily basis?
Um, I would say reconciling calls that we take. Sometimes we don't get the closure that we need to end a call in our minds. We'll make a visual in our minds, which always ends up being worse than it actually truly is. Going home and trying to separate your job from your personal life. Sometimes it's not that simple. You bring it home with you, and your family feels the effects of that. Sometimes you just need to sit down and unwind and take 15 minutes, which turns into 45 minutes, which turns into an hour and a half some days. Some days you just go home and open up a bottle of wine. I mean, it's just the way it is. But it's probably, I've heard multiple people say this that I've spoken to, it's the most rewarding job ever. They wouldn't trade it for the world, knowing it causes all kinds of issues.
Well, and I think when you're placing folks in harm's way or listening to people that are so distressed, and you're trying to be that calm, cool, collected voice on the other end, and helping those folks that you've dispatched to get on a scene where they're not having to deal with that. But you did mention something that I'm curious about, that you don't have a picture. We were just watching Kendall.
Right.
You've got that picture in your brain, and it sounds like you do some awfulizing.
Probably. We make it worse than what it truly is. Sometimes we make it exactly what it is, and it is as bad as we think. But I think that, and this is just my personal opinion, is that when we are listening to a phone call and listening to somebody describe what is going on, we're now painting that picture, and it's sometimes a little bit more like somebody will say, I have 10 people here, but in our minds we're painting it as, oh my God, there's 50. There's 50 people, and then 50 people have guns, and 50 people, our deputies are going to get hurt, and we start thinking the worst. We think the worst, hope for the best.
If I can interrupt, I imagine part of that is because you're trying to anticipate anything that could go wrong. So there's almost perhaps an exaggeration of the scene, because you are the comms for people who are about to arrive. And when we were talking earlier, before you came on, you mentioned I would hear you say we. Mm-hmm. So there's very much this sense of a connectedness and team, that your men and women are there, and that we are on scene, and that so you're an extension, physically, geographically dislocated, but very much a part of what's happening.
I could not agree more with that. I worked on shift for 13 years, I believe it was, and I worked with some people for years on end, and we just became friends. We became a family. You could pick out their voices in calls. You could pick out the tone and the change in their voice when something went down or something was going down. You could tell when they're just not right. So yeah, we definitely were an extension of that call.
What are some of the things that you bring home? You said that oftentimes we bring it home. And I think that's a very universal concept for first responders, is when you walk in the door and you know that you have it. What does that consist of?
For me, it's the stress of the job. For example, when my son was probably 4 or 5 months old, I took a phone call from a woman who was screaming on the other end of the line because her infant child just died from SIDS. And I brought that home with me. Like, I cried the entire way home. And when I got home, I just snuggled my son, but it also caused me to sleep on his floor for a week. Every hour waking up, making sure that he was breathing, because I just could not get the sounds of her screams out of my head, the visual that I created of this little infant lifeless body. And I didn't want it to be my child.
Right. When you're exposed to the extremity of humanity, I think it's really natural that possibility becomes probability. Mm-hmm. And when we start to personalize it, that it's not, we know conceptually that things are possible, But I think for all first responders, there's a teeter on that. Okay, is it just probably going to happen? And then folks around you will say, "Oh, you need to dial it back.
Right.
It's not so bad.
Right.
You know, people aren't so bad. You know, bad things don't happen as often." But when you're listening, as you said
Yep.
at the outset, you're getting calls most of the time from people on their worst days. I imagine there are some frivolous calls as well, and that either
Absolutely.
bring some levity, but
Yeah.
maybe some frustration.
They
Right.
sometimes the silliness can get us laughing, which is a good thing.
It is.
And then there's sometimes where things are just, you just shake your head when you hang up the phone, like, you called 911 for what? But you know, the person on the other end of the phone is thinking that is a major issue to them, and it's our job to help them, and that's exactly what we do, regardless of how small the problem is or how big the problem is. That's what we do.
I think, we talked a little bit about during when we were getting ready to get set up, but going back to that transition from duty to home, do you have a ritual, or is there something that you do before you open the front door?
Well, my drive home is about 20-25 minutes, and I have adopted singing. I will turn up some of my favorite music and I will sing the entire way home. It helps calm my soul. If I'm not heading directly home, I'm going to do CrossFit to alleviate some of that stress, which has been an amazing blessing. CrossFit is an amazing blessing for me. It's really, truly helped me get through some stressful issues.
And I also think it's probably good for sleep as well.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. What are some of the, you mentioned, I guess it's HIIT or CrossFit. What are some of the practices that you use? And singing is breathing
Mm-hmm.
and, really diaphragmatic,
Yep.
If you're so inclined. But some of the healthy ways that you've adopted over time.
I journal. I journal a lot. It helps me get some of my thoughts clear. I sing, of course. I do CrossFit. I play with my son. I take him out back and we play soccer or we play football in the backyard. I take him to the pool, to the beach. I hang out with my family. Family is very, very important, and you need them and you need their support. As long as they're there, everything else is just gravy.
You need to have that simplicity and those joyful moments to
Yes.
essentially balance out what you have rattling around between your ears.
Right.
Yes,
Because
ma'am.
Those
Right.
things tend not to dissipate
They
as
don't.
readily as joyous moments.
Mm-hmm.
So we almost have to double down on the good ones.
Yes, the good moments are a good thing.
Right. And just being silly and joyful and, so belt it out, sister. Dance
I
like
do
nobody's
daily.
watching.
I definitely do daily.
Yeah.
Debbie, you had mentioned that you are considered a non-sworn officer.
Yes, ma'am.
So technically speaking, you are not 911 operators, telecommunications are not considered first responders, which
Correct.
to me is ironic because you are quite literally the first response
Yes,
by
ma'am.
taking the call before you dispatch.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about that and the history of that and where things might be headed?
So, and I'm not sure what it stands for. OMB, up in DC,
Mhm.
they have us classified right now as secretarial. We
Personnel management, I think, Office of Personnel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We are not considered first responders, as we do the same thing as taxi cab dispatchers or bus dispatchers. So we are qualified under the same as them. There's a organization called APCO. It's the Association of Professional Communications Officers, who is pushing to get us reclassified into first responders. But it's been a battle for a few years now. They don't see it. We do. We feel it every day, but they don't see why we need to be reclassified.
Are you able to seek maybe through an EAP program services? Are there any preventive mental wellness programs typically for in communications departments?
Well, we of course have EAP through our agency, but not recently, over the last few years, we've developed a peer support team for it started off in communications and then has now graduated to a full agency peer support team, which has been an amazing ride to watch it grow and get where it needs to be. So those are the resources that we really do have. In my specific agency, we have a program called Communications Critical Incident, where I have a doctor that I can call when we have a major incident, and she'll come in and she'll sit with the shift and she'll debrief with them and she'll talk with them and get them talking. And it's fun to watch because the first 5 minutes everybody clams up and they're quiet, but within 10 or 15 minutes you got people sitting on the floor stretching out, just having a general conversation, laughing and joking, which is what they need after a critical incident. So that's where we're at this point.
That's great to hear.
It is. And I think you were very instrumental in getting this peer support movement started within the sheriff's department.
I was.
And kudos to that.
Thank you, ma'am.
I'm really seeing a need, and how important that is. I imagine some of that from your NYC experience, Nuevo York.
I wanted to read, if I could, something that I recently came across. Between the thin red, white, and blue lines of public safety lies the thinnest gold line. This gold line represents those who are rarely seen, dispatchers, the calm voice in the dark night, the golden glue that holds it all together. Beautiful sentiment.
Yeah,
it's very, very true.
Well, we absolutely consider you part of the first responder
Yes.
family, regardless of what it might say on paper in DC.
Right.
And we are really thrilled. It was really important for us, for you to be here and putting a voice out there for those whose voices are rarely heard. Clearly, the most important voices on the other end of our phones when
Yes, ma'am.
we call and need you. But we absolutely are. You are in the fold as far as we are
Yes.
concerned, and we'll make sure that that you are a part of every program that we have. And
I would appreciate that.
Yeah, we appreciate you, and Lieutenant Smith was an integral part of our summit, second annual summit of Bearing the Burden, and we just appreciate you so much.
Thank you.
any last words for our audience?
Support first responder projects, honestly, and support your dispatchers. Write to your congressman. Get the word out there that we deserve to be first responders. We don't need to be secretarial. We're not. We do so much more, and they're worth so much more.
Well, again, thank you so much,
Yeah.
Debbie. We
You're very
appreciate you
welcome.
being here.
You're very welcome.
Stay safe
Yeah.
and stay healthy.
Yes, please.
Trying.
And remember to gargle.
So we are going to shift to a pre-recorded interview, and we're going to, because we have several other people who are going to be part of our program for the rest of the evening until 8:30 tonight, we are going to have somewhat of an abbreviated, abridged version of an interview that took place with myself and Scott, who is a lieutenant with the Putnam County Sheriff's Office. Scott joined law enforcement in 2005. He became associated with Putnam County Sheriff's Office in 2007. Started off with patrol duty, became a patrol sergeant and patrol lieutenant. In 2008, he joined the agency SWAT team and is now a team leader there. He is also an assistant district commander and is in the narcotics unit. He helped to create the critical incident stress management response and heads up the peer support program. So Pete, behind the scenes there, behind the curtain, if you would cue up the interview, we'd appreciate it.
Can you talk a little bit about the types of exposures that first responders, specifically in your line of work, have to contend with that can affect both yourselves as professionals and as human beings?
Sure. So in it's my experience working with a smaller agency, kind of a rural agency, I have had the experience of having to do a lot more, kind of a wider range of things than some of the experience I've heard with larger agencies. Just the amount of experience in different types of events that I've had to I've had the opportunity to participate in and be exposed to. I think that it, certainly the I guess the level of experience here has sorry, I'm kind of lost for words. It's just, I guess it's been anything from homicides to robberies to neighbor complaints, barking dogs, and everything in between. In terms of law enforcement, first responders, those are the things that we deal with. The very publicized things that some of your listeners see in the news on a regular basis, the large drug arrests, the homicides and robberies and stuff like that. We respond to those in different capacities, and then could go from a very grisly homicide scene to a husband and wife arguing, a child that won't go to school and won't listen to their parent. So the number of different hats that we could be required to wear in a given shift, it can be difficult to transition from one to another, and leave everything from the previous call, to go fresh into the next call. So, like I said, I think I heard in the academy that this is kind of a front row seat to the greatest show on earth, and for some reason that really at that time I was very excited about it. I still am, and I believe that this is definitely a show. But I guess I wasn't sure what the cost of admission was. To watch some of the when people need the cops, it's usually not a good thing going on in their life. They're not calling you to celebrate. They're not calling us to celebrate something exciting, or it's usually some kind of negativity. So we're the ones that have to go and deal with that, and in some form or another, and it can take a toll, I think. So, like I said, there are certainly some moments where it's good things can be witnessed. Seeing people at their worst point in their life sometimes, over and over and over, I think can be very difficult. So that kind of exposure, combined with the current climate now, where if you show up in uniform, the immediate response is that you're a dirty cop, and just for being a cop, you're kind of lumped into either being extremely violent, or you're going to violate someone's rights. And so it that kind of negativity, and it can be hard to block that stuff out and compartmentalize it, and be effective at your job. And I think that's ultimately what we want for our deputies, and our law enforcement, all of our first responders, to be able to do their job effectively, but also to be able to go home at the end of the day kind of still intact, physically and mentally.
It sounds like there's quite a bit of rise and fall to the day. That there are moments of good humanity, and there is certainly the lion's share of bad humanity or inhumanity. And it's a matter of taking it all in, sorting it out, putting it into boxes, compartmentalizing, being probably an exquisite skill set that many of you have, so as to shield others from the effects of that, and maybe even to shield yourselves from that. You talked about somewhat of a layered exposure, so that you're dealing in the actual line of work, you're dealing with people at their at their most desperate and at their most maybe inhumane, and then having to contend also with the social aspect of it. And can you give us some insight into some of your personal experiences where you began to realize that psychological and emotional toll or that burden that can be incurred?
Sure, sure. Um, so as I said, I've been involved in law enforcement since 2005, with the sheriff's office since 2007, and in that time, I've certainly had a number of exciting, adrenaline producing moments, and some of them quite scary. Um, the you know, I guess in the academy, I kind of, thinking back in terms of how well I was prepared for what I would be getting into. There was some focus on the mental preparation, and a lot of it had to do with the reality that at some point you may be asked or forced to use deadly force, uh, and that would be the kind of the deciding moment where you know you have to be prepared to do that. And of course hesitation could cause you to could have consequences, which could result in you or someone else getting hurt. So I think at a very early point in my career, I was comfortable with the decision that if I needed to do something to protect myself, that's what I would do. And then throughout my career, I in trying to be the best law enforcement officer that I could be. I wanted to be very productive. I wanted to, I think I looked at a lot of other deputies around me, my peers and my supervisors, and tried to look at, who I could take an example from, and what kind of traits were they exhibiting. And some of the guys on my SWAT team were certainly instrumental in that. And of course, the topics come up where guys that have been involved in shootings in the past. I'd had conversations with them, and then at some point I think I took went to a seminar with Dave Grossman, and and talked about the bulletproof mind. And so all of these things I kind of had in my mind, that if I ever were faced with a situation where I had to use deadly force, that I would I felt like I was prepared. It's the best way I could put it. And eventually that time came, and following my first shooting, officer involved shooting, I had another conversation with one of my fellow deputies, and the he had actually been injured in this shooting, and he said to me, well, now you know that kind of what you're capable of, and that you can do it, if the need arises. And it meant a lot to me, I think, to kind of having proven myself, I guess, to my peers also, that we survived, and all of these things. But then kind of looking, doing a self-assessment following that shooting, I was looking for something big. I guess in my mind I kind of thought that that I was fine, and that everything was. I was looking for a big, like, you're either messed up or you're good, right? And I didn't feel messed up. I don't feel messed up. So I figured I was good. And it kind of bring that full circle, following my second officer involved shooting. still felt okay, and even more so because I kind of felt like I guess that I knew what to do and knew what to expect, and the eventually it became apparent to me that maybe things weren't as good as I thought that they were. Um, and it wasn't like an on or off switch. It was certainly something that had to be pointed out to me by some of my loved ones, my wife specifically. Bless her heart, she's very patient with me, and but it was necessary for me to kind of use her as a a sounding board, uh, because things were some of my behavior and my emotions were out of check, and that I guess that expressed itself in the form of just very sudden anger, um, with the people that are closest to me, which didn't make sense to me, but I also didn't feel like I could control it, and it was so subtle that it was I just thought that that's who I was. I was just having a bad day, or something like that. But then once it was kind of pointed out to me, and I began to find myself in those situations where I was just so angry, and yelling over something probably stupid. It just wasn't. Um, I felt very comfortable in a chaotic and a dangerous situation, um, but I felt very uncomfortable and sometimes very angry, just driving in the car with three kids, or having to make a small decision like what to eat for dinner, or um, so so that's the way that it kind of expressed itself to me, and I can't really point to one event um, throughout my career. I mean, those are some of the highlights, I guess, with some of the most um, dramatic, I would think. But just the years of seeing um, bodies and people doing things to each other, watching the effects of addiction, and how that devastates families, and those things I tend to personalize, and I think I think about my kids and what if they end up that way, the way I see some of these people, and so as I as I've gone through my career, I really felt. I think I've felt on scenes more than um, I just I just kind of it felt like a human being, and but I didn't feel like it was okay to express that, and so I think what I've done over the years is just kind of push that down and move on, and that's what I think we to a degree have to do on a day-to-day basis in order to do our jobs. We can't come out and just handle one call and then call it a day. But at some point, I have to deal with that stuff. And up until that point where, I started realizing that maybe I had a lot of anger and a lot of stuff inside me. I think up until that point, I didn't realize that I had that stuff, kind of in there. Um, so when it decides to come out, it's not always pleasant, and so that's kind of where I'm at, I guess.
And we're just taking a quick break in the interview as we splice a different segment of that and finish up speaking with Scott. And up next, we're going to be speaking with John, who is a 26-year law enforcement veteran. And he's going to be talking about the psychological and emotional wear and tear of law enforcement work. And that'll be in just a few minutes. And we will finish up this interview. Pete, are we good? All right.
You talking with us today. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your participation in the summit. First Responder Project is really keenly aware of the difficulty in getting first responders to avail themselves of services, and which is why we're starting off with the summits and providing some education and peer connection, family forums, and then clearly what we hope to be doing next with fundraising is to start running retreats so we can have these conversations, not just with first responders, but with their support people. So your contribution today has really been wonderful. I greatly appreciate it.
Glad to. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Scott. Stay safe.
Thanks, Tracy.
Thank you, Pete, for helping out with that splice. And right now we're going to be talking with John. John, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Hello, Tracy.
Terrific. Thank you for being here. I know that's been probably another long day at work for you, so we appreciate you taking even more time out to speak with our listening audience about the toll on the human, not just the person in uniform. So if you would, can you give the audience an idea of some of the maybe known and particularly the things that are unknown about life working or working on the street, behind the scenes, in the various positions you've had?
I think that probably one of the biggest unknowns is that the community most likely sees law enforcement, the profession, as what you see on television. A lot of shows like Cops and live shows like that, they do portray a lot of what you see on the street, but what they don't portray is the aftermath of those things that you experience. A lot of the things that are on those shows are the excitement, the things that a lot of us got into the profession for, because it's a really thrilling thing. It's an adrenaline boost when you're involved in those kind of things. But there's a significant aftermath on the backside of that when that adrenaline drops, or the things that are seen there. That psychological trauma, whether it's at a crime scene or when you see victims, when you see dead bodies, when you hear about domestic violence victims and what they have went through, all those things, they pile up over time. They're very cumulative. And when I got in the profession in 1993, there really wasn't a whole lot of discussion about, what do we do about those things. And so the first 8 years that I spent at two other agencies, I really didn't understand what was happening. I worked on the midnight shift for the majority of those 8 years. And I thought that was, that's the best time to be out there. You're going to be doing a lot of things that are fun. But it really took a toll because it changed me. Those first 8 years changed me. I used to be very outgoing, like to be around people. And it was a slow drift, something that I didn't recognize. It led to the destruction of my first marriage. One of the things that's very prevalent is that officers typically, but not always, tend to lose a lot of the friendships they had prior to entering the profession. You end up to a place to where the only people that you associate with are other officers, and mainly because there's a trust factor there, because you find out over time that the general public, they really just don't understand what you're going through. And there's a lot of hypervigilance involved, especially, it was safer back when I started. It's very dangerous now. Not to say that I didn't experience some times when it would have been very easy to have lost my life. But it's other than a combat veteran that is in the theater constantly under fire, the law enforcement side is one of those to where you are always on guard, and it's very difficult to turn that switch off. So if you think about that heightened state of awareness over an extended period of time, what it does to your body, that stress, because it's like, if I'm at home, there's really no threat factor there unless somebody's beating on my door. So if you think about what that heightened arousal is for somebody beating on your door, and you do it for 8 hours a day, or some shifts are even longer, and you do it for year after year, that plus what you see out there, the because we see the worst of it. There's just no other way to describe it. We see a lot of things that the average citizen doesn't. And how you process or don't process those things all together as a cumulative whole, it's not surprising that police officers after retirement, they only typically live for a couple of years after retirement. And it really does take a lot of years off of your life. So, and that's just what the officer sees. The toll on your families and those around you is very significant as well.
Can you speak to a little bit about that? What you've noticed from the outside looking into your family? You've been keenly aware of the changes in yourself. And I think that most people in a first responder occupation would agree with you that there is a change. There's a noticeable change, and probably a necessary one. If you operated on the street like you did in your house, bad things could happen. If that situational awareness wasn't in place. So as within your family, but kind of akin to them, or adjacent to what's going on in the family, what have you noticed in terms of changes in what's happening in the home as a function of your job?
So I can tell you that from in my first marriage, my wife was literally forced into, because of my hypervigilance, abandoning all of her friendships. It wasn't because I told her to, it's because I became suspicious of everybody. It didn't matter who it was. And so, that led to almost a degree of abandonment, because, we moved to another city. The only person that she knew was me. And when she would try to make friends with people, the first thing I was thinking of was, what's their background? And so you can't do that and be sane, especially when you're at home or just going out to dinner. You're looking at every person that comes through the door, looking at their hands, their waist. So, you're really distracted away from quality time with them. And it's a good thing that we didn't have kids, because they would have suffered that also. They would have had to seen that. But even after it destroyed my first marriage, and even in my second one, where we were very much aware of the things that caused me to change, there was still a struggle, because in my second marriage is a blended family, and my stepson was 12 at the time, and anybody that he would even associate with, I was suspicious of, even at 12, which is kind of crazy. I mean, you always want to protect your family and those kind of things, but it was to the extreme, and it caused my wife to get stuck in the middle, because that's her son, and they had been together, the whole time, even through previous marriages she had. So it wasn't like we were a team. It was very much me trying to be the warrior guardian, but at the same time, you can't ride that same bicycle with your spouse and your family when you're doing that, because you're trying to protect them from things that are really, in most cases, not ever going to happen. And so that hypervigilance at home. And I remember in premarital counseling, I was asked very specifically, how do you turn that off? And I said, what do you mean? I just come home and take my uniform off and my gun belt, put it in the closet, and I turn it off. And the pastor kept badgering me about that. And I just kept giving the same answer, because at that time, I really believed that's all it was. You just turn it off. But several years later, after struggling in a second marriage for 4 years, it was very obvious that you literally couldn't just turn it off. You had to change a lot of things about your daily living, your daily routine. We had to make a very concerted effort that we had a lot of friendships with people outside of the job, which I didn't have in my first marriage. And matter of fact, and nothing against the people that I work with, because they're great and they have always been. But for several years now, we don't go out with them. We don't do anything like that. And it's not because we don't like them. It's just, if you don't stay attached to the real world, to what's really going on, there is significant damage. And there's no question that what happened in our house in those first 4 years left a negative mark on both my wife and my stepson. So, the only thing that we can do to try to repair some of that is have open discussions about it and be very honest and frank. And that is unfortunately a kind of a weakness that we have with police officers, because we don't want to admit those kind of things. It's very much a sign of weakness, and if somebody finds out about it, you never know what that could look like. And I don't think that law enforcement is really, it's starting to shift away from that warrior mentality more to the guardian and trying to balance that. But in some places, it's that hardcore warrior mindset, and so it spills over into the family dynamic. The law enforcement divorce rate is extremely high and always has been, but the suicide rate now is, I think it may have tapered off a little bit this year. I haven't kept track of the numbers, but last year was extremely high. And in most cases, or in a lot of cases, officers would rather just take their life than to, admit that they're struggling, or to try to get help, or who do I confide in? And when you can't confide in, your own family, but also in somebody that's a professional, you're really stuck in a position to where it appears that there's very little hope. And so it is really, and for your family to have to watch you go through that and not understand what's happening, that is a big piece of it, the spouse and family side, the support side. And that really is something that's needed in this profession, is because they really are. They're out there on an island a lot of times. And the couples that we talk to that are in public safety that are struggling, we see a lot of the same similarities in what I'm talking about. So the family dynamic is really maybe an up and coming thing, but it's not at the level that it needs to be.
Thank you, John. You talk about the warrior and guardian, and a lot of times the stoic warrior is the persona that you must adopt to have that be the presence when you're doing your job. And having worked from a couple of decades with combat veterans, we would oftentimes come to the determination that there comes a point at which the warrior and the man need to reconcile some things, that there needs to be a conversation or a dialogue. And many people will recognize that very quickly as something that they're very wary of, and not something that they want to necessarily do, but oftentimes that may become necessary to be able to be fit and be conditioned and remain as operationally ready as possible. I think that the cautiousness and the protectiveness comes from a need to err on the side of caution. And maybe because your cups are so full, there's no room for any more danger. There's no room for any more tragedy, for any more threat, for any more trauma in your life, particularly from your happening within your family. So I think that's that mentality of just needing to, even though you are more than capable of protecting, there is that sense of what if I wasn't able to anticipate or see or notice something happening. So it's really difficult to turn that on and off. When we had our first summit last year, what was very noticeable to the military people in the crowd was that when they go on a deployment, they turn the switch on for the length of that deployment, and when they come back, they have to recalibrate. And it's not something that's easy for them to do in the least. What they noticed and gave feedback to us is that they remarked how difficult, they couldn't imagine how difficult it must be to turn that switch on and off every day, every
Yes.
shift. And it was once said to me by a veteran that they were more comfortable in a place where everyone wanted to kill them than they are in a place where anybody could kill them. And that's a very understandable statement to our military. There is that the sense of waiting for the other shoe to drop, and that means that adrenaline and cortisol are pumping through the body and at unnatural times for unnatural lengths of time, and really ends up wearing the body down and the mind. Can you talk a little bit about, you mentioned the reluctance that first responders have to seek care. Can you talk a little bit about why it's important for us to be talking about mental wellness?
I can for me, if we had been having these discussions the first 5 years of my career, I don't think that I would be, I don't know what the right word to call it is. One of my sergeants, when I was about 7 years in, wrote in my annual evaluation that I was quite a bit standoffish, and I'd never worked for him before, and I thought he's talking about somebody else. And but there was a little bit of reflection there, and looking back on it, he was exactly right. But that was just one of those clues along the way that I missed, and it was probably because the people that I was working with, that I was associated with, there was a informal clique on the squad that I was on, and those were the guys that were out doing certain types of work, and if you weren't involved in that, you were pretty much viewed as an outsider. So you really didn't know where you stood, even though you wore the same uniform, the same badge. And a lot of it depends on the leadership of the agency, who's leading that culture that's out there and present. But and I'm fortunate, in the current place that I'm at, that it's outstanding leadership. It's really about the wellness of the employee, because there's going to be, hopefully, some type of life after you leave this job, and whether it be another career or something else. And it's you don't want to leave this career and you don't know who you are when you get out of it. That day when you walk out the door, for me, I've reconciled it enough to where I'm actually looking forward to retirement, not doing this anymore, just because of the trauma and the things that I've seen on this job. But there's a significant portion of officers that this uniform and that badge is this their identity, and so they're so overinvested in it that it happens a lot that day that they walk out the door is not always one that they're celebrating. It's one about, now what am I going to do? Because that's their whole life has been that. Now, I thought about that earlier today. I'm 52 years old and I've been doing this for 26 years. Half of my life has been doing this, but through doing other healthy things and being involved in outside activities, things that are options to do after the profession, there's something else to look forward to. But I don't know that everybody has that, and that's why these discussions are so important, because not everybody's on the brink. Some and a lot of us are okay. We really are. But I think my question is do we recognize in ourselves how much trauma there really is? Do we know how much it's controlling what our thoughts are, how we act toward others? That on and off every day, like you talked about, is very prevalent, because it's like working on a midnight shift, and then you have 2 days off, and you got to get used to everybody else being on living in the sunlight. But then you've got to get ready to go back to that midnight shift in 2 days, and you do it over and over and over. So the conversations about it, and I probably got way off the question, but the conversations about it are crucial, because it's the things that we don't talk about, in my opinion, that are the most damaging. And those things that, and a friend of mine, Adam Davis, who's an author and a retired police officer, he made a statement that a lot of the reason why we don't want to talk about it is because we don't want to relive it ourselves. And just talking about it does that, because it brings back those things. And so the conversations are critical in a controlled environment with people that we can trust, and that's the hard part. So it's really incumbent upon agencies to set up those cultures if they want to have healthy officers, because we know that I worked in internal affairs for a long time, and you just see a lot of the things that people are going through, and the misconduct that's present. A lot of it's driven by things in their personal life that are kind of prompted by the stresses and traumas that we haven't dealt with from the job. So, and just to lose a police officer, minimum investment for a police officer a couple of years ago was $100,000. So taxpayer dollars, that's a big loss. Every time you lose an officer to retirement, suicide, one of them gets killed, that's a lot of money invested in a person. So, the last thing we want to do is, especially veterans that have been around a long time, they have a lot of institutional knowledge, they have a lot to share, to teach, those kind of things. So when you lose those, it's really a problem. But when you lose the family structure behind it, that's even more detrimental because, but it is, to me, it's the things that we don't talk about. And that's why, organizations like First Responder Project and others that do things across this country to bring these things to the surface, to give an opportunity to help and to heal not only the officer, but the family at the same time. It's kind of that, it's like breaking the chains and the lock off, because over the years, you're just wrapping that chain more and more around and putting locks on it. And these conversations and things that we have in these closed environments are critical. They break the locks off. And I've heard spouses say that, they haven't seen, wives especially, they haven't seen their husband in years after going through therapy and these types of things. So I think they're invaluable.
So as a nonprofit, naturally we are invested in providing services that are not otherwise in place. And to do that, of course, we need in-kind donations, monetary donations. What would you, as we finish this interview, what would you like to tell the community in terms of what they can do to support you, and also to your fellow first responders in terms of ensuring their readiness and quality of life?
So for the community, my hope is that, not everybody wants to do a ride along, but just doing one. And I think it opened my current wife knew about the profession. She knew about the job, but it wasn't until she started going on ride alongs that she saw what was really going on. She was there when I got in a physical fight with a suspect, and that's kind of an eye opener. To sit there and you can't do anything, you're helpless. So, going on these ride-alongs though, the community, I think, when I've had riders before, they go and they get to the end and they're like, that's nothing like I thought it was. That's not what it looks like on television. And, when you see, officers' line of duty deaths and these funerals and things like that, they don't see that either unless it's on the news, just a clip of the procession going on. But there's a lot of emotion and things. There's trauma across the board. And so my hope is that the community would engage with the law enforcement agencies, go on ride-alongs, participate in citizen academies so you can see some of these things, at least from the surface level. But also, if you can, support the organizations that are really trying to support the first responders and their families. There's not a lot of funding out there for it. I mean, there's very little of it, even at the federal level, whether it be grants or things like that. So these organizations, they are really pouring into that of their own time, and a lot of times out of their own pockets, and they just can't survive. So, if you, I'm not saying anybody doesn't, but if you really value your first responders, and you can, afford to do so, please consider, giving to them, because, the retreats and the things, they refresh and restore, or at least give that opportunity for first responders to do that. Because, just coming home on a weekend, that doesn't just flat out recharge you. And it's just like being in a marriage. If you want to sustain it, you're going to have to go in and do those investments to sustain that as well. It's the same thing for first responders. So investing in that is a key thing. So, I would encourage anybody that can financially do so to support that, and also get to know, what's going on with your first responders in your local communities.
Thank you, John. Thank you for your over quarter century of service. Thank you for your time tonight, and please stay healthy and stay safe.
Thank you.
Take care. We are going to switch gears again, and we are going to play a pre-recorded interview with one of our law enforcement wives, and we'll cue that up in just a moment. All set, Pete? And then we'll end with an interview from an FDLE officer, and we'll close the night out. Hi, I'd like to introduce the listening audience to Lyra, who is going to be speaking with us about family life for first responders. So welcome to our fundraiser on Facebook Live today, Lyra.
Hi.
I'd like to ask you first, what kind of impact of first responder work is there on spouses and significant others of first responders?
I think that some of the impacts that I've noticed kind of slowly over the years is there's kind of a different set of expectations, I think, on the spouses than I've noticed for some of my friends who are spouses that are not of law enforcement, and to include like, you know, safety expectations. And my friends will be like, oh, we'll just go here and we'll go there. And, you know, I'm like, oh, well, yeah, but you can't do that because of safety. And I'm sure my husband wouldn't want to do that as a group because that's not safe. And those are some expectations that I've kind of noticed that even myself have changed in my opinions over the years that I never would have thought of initially. You know, I would have been just like my friends. Oh yeah, let's just go do that. And those things have kind of slowly changed in my own opinions over the years as an impact of his own work and as an impact of things that he will come home and say. And even like when we go into restaurants and, you know, where he sits, and I automatically am like, oh, we sit on this side of the table because he's got to sit, you know, with his back to the wall. And those things, you know, that impacts our, you know, a family. And those are just small things, but general big things is, you know, keeping chaos down, because, you know, chaos when he comes in the door from work is too much to handle, because there's that unwinding period when they come home from work, because work has been so chaotic that there needs to be like a debriefing kind of window of time when they come in from work, that I don't think I necessarily noticed that initially, but over the years I have tended to notice that, you know, too much chaos in the door is too much to handle initially. And, you know, those are just kind of small things that I don't necessarily notice in other people whose families are not law enforcement or first responders in general. I'm sure not just related to law enforcement, but first responders in general. So those are just kind of small things, and especially the big chaos component. That is a big one, and debriefing windows of time that are needed.
Do you notice that your definition of chaotic is different than your husband's?
Very much so. Because the minor parts of things like kids running around and we need to do this and we got to run over here and hey, let's just spontaneously throw this in, for me is not a big deal, whereas for him that's a huge difference. Well, that wasn't part of the plan, and well, now how are we going to do this? And for me, I'm just like, yeah, we just go right through and do that, you know, that's not a problem. Whereas that's much more like we're off skew from the plan, and that's too much to think of, and you know, that wasn't part of the original idea, and now that alters the whole entire thing, and that takes a little bit more of manipulating for him to kind of wrap around. As for me, I'm just, you know, that doesn't bother me as much. So yes, chaos is much easier for me to handle than chaos is for him to handle, and I think that definitely is a component of his job, because chaos is he very much needs to control chaos, whereas I can just be like, yeah, whatever, it's chaos, it doesn't bother me. But chaos very much needs to be controlled in his environment.
So you're essentially doing a lot of forward planning, a lot of what your spouse probably does on his job, you are doing in everyday life. So particularly, I imagine if you're leaving the home, but there is pre-planning and there's pre-staging and all those iterations of essentially of a mission. If the mission is going to, you know, a concert or going to the school or whatnot. So there's almost like a parallel process that you're managing the family, and then also kind of thinking about what types of things you're going to keep your spouse feeling comfortable and happy and calm. And
very much so. He generally wants to just hear what needs to happen and not all the details.
So you've probably heard the bluff, right? The bottom line up front. What is what's the plan, the comp plan? Yeah. It's interesting because a lot of first responders will say that they find calm in chaos when it's at work. Clearly not the case when it is at home, right? And in some ways, too much calmness can feel a little bit chaotic. So there's a lot of paradoxes, but very much some universality among first responders. What types of things do you notice for that your husband's work might have on your children?
So it is interesting because he wants very much rules to be followed. and sometimes there's a hard time kind of turning off that element of like, if I've said it, then it just needs to be followed and done. And there doesn't need to be any like variance of, well, I just didn't necessarily feel like doing it. Well, I've told you to do it, so it should just be done. I'm like, well, they aren't always going to follow through with that. And so sometimes there's a hard time of kind of transitioning to, there is not just going to follow exactly what you say. You know, there has to be some more explaining and some more, you know, explanation involved. And generally speaking, it's a hard transition from not needing to explain. You know, I do all the explaining more so at home, whereas he has a hard time transitioning to, I've just said it, it should be done. Okay, well, you can't tell your 5-year-old to just go get dressed. They're not going to go get dressed. They're going to be running around with the clothes over here and putting the toys in the backpack, and they're not just going to get dressed. Right. And just because you said it doesn't mean they're going to do it. So that one is a hard one. And then I think the learning lessons sometimes can be, you know, like if my child will say something and maybe it's, you know, talking about some kid did this and there's some moral lesson involved there, and that can turn into like, well, those types of people wind up in jail. And I'm like, okay, all right. I don't think we need to go into like, everyone's going to jail. We're just learning the lesson, you know, that maybe that wasn't a smart choice. So did you see what he learned from that? Maybe we don't do that, and we're not all ending up in jail. Because I get that he's trying to not have them end up making poor choices, but I think that we go overboard sometimes with everyone's ending up in jail, because obviously we deal with those types of people on the other side for him. But sometimes my kids are like, oh my God, you're going to end up in jail if you just turn off the road in the wrong way, you don't turn your blinker. And I'm like, no, you're not going to end up in jail for every wrong choice. But, you know, so I think sometimes
you're raising very responsible kids, right? Kids that are keenly aware of right and wrong, and you know, what types of things are going to, you know, maybe end up in a bad direction down the road. So there's certainly an advantage in that type of upbringing. Do you think kids of first responders of all different types of line of duty, do you think that kids have enough opportunities to be recognized, to, you know, for the type of family that they are a part of, that being a first responder?
I don't know, because we tend to not necessarily say that we're part of a first responder family. Just because, not out of like a shame thing or anything, but out of a safety thing. So I don't know that my kids necessarily have an opportunity to say very often like, hey, my dad's, you know, first responder, because out of a safety thing, we tend to not say that so much. And even me in my practice, I tend to not say, I don't use my married name because of a safety purpose. So I think that maybe they might lose out on that a little bit. Whereas I think maybe with military and maybe with, you know, fire rescue, they get to say that a little bit more. Whereas I think for law enforcement, maybe kids lose out on that a little bit, because I'm sure there's a lot of other law enforcement families for safety purposes. They don't tend to say they're, you know, dad this or that, because that could be unsafe. And especially, you know, in certain environments now, it's even more unsafe. But for that reason, we don't tend to say, you know, so I think they may lose out on that a little bit.
Do you think that kids are sometimes stressed by what's going on in the environment around them, whether it be on a societal level, or just knowing that mom or dad are going out and being on the street or taking care of whatever business they have to take care of?
I think yes, because I do know that my children do tend to be a little hypervigilant about, you know, what time is dad coming home? Are the doors locked? Is he come home? Has he checked in? Those types of things. So yeah, I think that they do notice those elements for sure. I think there is a component there. My one child checks the doors every night, you know, especially if my husband is out at night shift, you know, are all the doors locked? And then he'll go around and check them again. And I'm like, that's not your job. You don't need to worry about that. I just go to bed. So I try very hard to not have him be so concerned with that, because I want him to try to kind of be a little normalized with that and not be so hypervigilant about that. Although I think, some element of that is good because he should be kind of responsible of that, but also I don't want that to consume him and only be concerned with everything with that too. So I try to balance that a little bit, but yeah. I think he is a little concerned about that.
All
And
things. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, yeah, anytime, if we wake up and maybe my husband hasn't come home yet, then have you heard from dad yet? So there is definitely that element for sure.
Yeah, it's an added layer of that I think people don't appreciate necessarily for both spouses, even for parents of a first responder, and certainly for children, that there's that mindfulness all the time of safety and concern and is everything okay? And it's just always going on in the background, kind of like the security program of a computer. It's always running, even though we don't see it. And sometimes it really interrupts or disrupts what we're trying to do. And other times quietly in the background. Certainly, I think there's a heightened sense of situational awareness, which, like you said, have its advantages and disadvantages. But certainly also within first responder work, when the goalposts have been moved, so to speak, it is difficult to not have somewhat of a flip switch mentality of, danger, not danger. And so that can kind of permeate throughout the family. What types of things do you think are important for the community at large to understand about first responders and their families?
That it is a very important job, obviously, and it's a very stressful job. And I also think that it's really important for there to be more kind of support groups and support things like your company is doing, and raising that awareness for that support to be there. This is going to sound very cheesy, but there used to be a Lifetime show that I used to watch that I was so envious of. I think it was called Army Wives or something like that. But I was like, look at this. They have like this group and they have these ladies that are all together and like support each other. And how great is that? And there doesn't generally seem to be that I don't know for like firefighter wives or whatnot, but at least for law enforcement wives, it doesn't seem to generally be these groups that get together and have that support, even from the community's sake or even from internally from the law enforcement wives. And I think that makes it so much easier. And if someone were to say, like, when I first was with my husband, he wasn't law enforcement, he went to school and became law enforcement. But when he started his job, if I would have known these things or understood, how shift work works and night shift and all of these things, and that support was there, it would have been much easier than to feel like, you were kind of in it alone and going, oh God, this sucks. Or not all the time, but, there certainly was moments where I was like, oh, this is horrible. If there was someone there that was like, hey, it gets better, or hey, this is normal, or hey, this does happen, or, that would have been so much easier or nicer, or at least, felt like you weren't alone in the situation. And so if there was a community, understanding that happens and, that they could support that or understand that happens and support the kids in that and support families in that, that would be important or good to know,
That's something too that our organization is trying to promote across leadership. Is there's something very akin to what you were saying in the military called a family readiness group or something along those lines, and having a way for people to communicate, because there is a universal experience of being a family of a first responder, whether it has to do with pride or it has to do with concern and worry. But to be able to have something like that outside, I think for the most part, and nowadays people do that virtually and people do that kind of in their own ways. They find that support, but it's not necessarily within that small community. Is there anything that comes to mind that you can think of that communities can do to show support for first responders?
I think that donations to organizations that can raise money for them is great, because lots of times, first responders don't have the funding to even, support these things and do that type of stuff. Even for the first responders themselves, to have support to do mental health and all of that, I think is very important for them as well. And lots of times even organizations don't have funding to do that. so they're kind of just left to find that on their own. And that, lots of times doesn't happen because there's a, kind of a fear of finding that or a fear of talking about that. And so if they're left to find that on their own, or the organization doesn't have funding to do that, then that doesn't happen. And it just kind of, the ball drops on that. So if there's organizations out there that can have funding, raised for that so that they can go out and spread the word about that, and maybe it's not so scary, or it's not okay to talk about, then, people can get help with that. So I think that that's a very helpful element to do.
Mm-hmm. Most people don't realize that a lot of first responders have more than one job to support their families, because they're not paid commensurate to the peril and the exposure that they have on the job, both physiologically, and psychologically.
Mm-hmm.
I'll end with this last question, and feel free to add in anything that you'd like as well. Why do you think it's important to focus on first responder wellness?
Because I think that on a daily basis, they deal with some extraordinarily intense situations day in and day out. And on top of that, while they're dealing with that, they have to deal with trying to stay alive themselves or rescue other people while trying to stay alive themselves. And on a general human level, that's a high adrenaline dump every day on its own. And then dealing with what they've they have to come down from the adrenaline dump, and then dealing with what they've seen and how they process what they've seen. And then they have to come home and deal with family expectations and whether they're meeting those family expectations or not. Sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't. And then that creates resentments and builds up. And then, so now you add that on top of that, that mental health can fall at times or crumble at times. And then you have that whole society expectation that, we don't talk about our mental health. We're fine. We're tough people. We take care of people. We rescue people. We save people. And we're always fine because we're expected to be fine. So all of that is really, really important, because then if that's just kind of the baseline of we just keep going because we're always fine and we're the ones that are supposed to be fine, saving everyone. And then we've had all of these experiences that we are not ever dealing with, that we see intensely all the time. It just kind of gets worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. So I think that being able to deal with that mental health and that mental wellness, including physical wellness, because if you have repeated injuries that you don't take care of, and that, builds and builds, and then that just kind of, takes to a level that you can't take it anymore. Those, they crumble and bad things happen. So those are all essential elements that need to be taken care of on a human level every day.
Essentially need that preventive maintenance that we put into our vehicles and we put into our home to make sure that we weatherproof, and we make sure we stay kind of put together and held together. And we oftentimes, I think, on a societal level and on an individual level, sometimes in a family level, we either take for granted that those things are just going to keep maintaining, that, I'll just keep going until I can't go anymore. And we really do need to take a more proactive approach to it, particularly when you're talking about some of the more intangible things like your mental health and your emotional well-being. It sometimes just isn't recognizable until it manifests in some other way. All of a sudden we're yelling, or all of a sudden, something's kind of gone off of the rails. And then we start doing that back up. Okay, when did this, start to go in that direction? Any last words for any of our listening audience in terms of promoting support for first responders and their families?
I think that all first responders are amazing people. I think their families are amazing people. I think they do amazing jobs. And I think that you guys are doing an amazing job. And I think everybody should donate. I think that this is a great, organization. And I hope that everybody out there really understands that what everybody is doing here is great, and everybody should donate and really help everybody out here.
Thank you, Lyra. I appreciate that very much. First Responder Project is really thrilled to have you be a part of our family and be helping us out, both you and your husband and your kids. So we wish you very healthy fall season. Please stay safe, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Thanks
You
again.
too. Thanks for having me.
Take care.
Bye.
Okay, and we are moving on to our final interview for this evening. And the interview today is with Matt Walsh with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. Matt, can you hear us?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Can you start
All
off?
right.
Can you start off by telling us a little bit about your background?
Sure. So I'm beginning my 24th year in law enforcement. I served on a local level down in Fort Myers with the sheriff's office. And then I came over to FDLE, 17 years ago. And I've lived in South Florida, Central Florida, and now Northeast Florida. I've been all over.
So you've been all over geographically and also in terms of professionally in your career. Can you talk about some of the notable events in your life and some of the experiences that you had that have left a lasting impact?
Sure. So my background is death and homicide. I spent most of my career investigating death and homicide. I've been a SWAT operator, and I've been in charge of many critical incidents. I went to the Pulse nightclub after the terrorist attack, and I led the team that identified the decedents. I've been to the Sebring mass shooting, Parkland, after Parkland shooting, and in those roles, Sebring, Parkland, the Broward Airport shooting, and after what I did at the Pulse, I've led crisis intervention for the FDLE agents and members who responded to those. So yeah, I mean, I've really run the gamut: road patrol, street crimes, homicide, SWAT, and then what I just said about the what I've done for FDLE.
So in addition to having a tremendous amount, unfortunate, tremendous amount of exposure to witnessing the aftermath of mass shootings and other events, you've also had a critical incident yourself.
Yeah, I've had several. Probably the one that I talk about when I lecture on this is I talk about not that a bad guy when he tried to kill me. He crushed me between two cars, and he ended up getting shot, but he lived, and he was found not guilty at trial. But that's the one I talk about. But I've had others, critical incidents throughout my career.
That and you're breaking up a little bit. Hopefully, the audience can hear you all right. Can you tell us a little bit about the impact that your job has when either you're in uniform, you're in the line of duty, and when you are at home trying to relax in the space between?
Sure. So earlier in my career, it really is. I was always on. My head was on. Always hyper vigilant. Didn't really sleep all well. I was waiting for the next call out. I was waiting for the next homicide. I was waiting for the next event. So I was always ready to respond. And really, it affected me, and it still does over the years. But it affected my family life. It affected my relationship with my wife, and it does. It can overtake your time when you shouldn't be that way. But what the job does and our training and what we do to prepare every day is we always train for the what ifs. It's very, very hard to change your mindset when you're always prepared for the worst case scenario.
Well, you certainly see the direct result of the worst case scenarios. So I'm wondering, spending so much time in your professional life around the deceased and those who have committed crimes of homicide, how do you manage to function among the living?
It's a good question. I'm a lot older now, as you can see. I have this beard, and I'm nearing the end of my career, and it takes a long time, or took me a long time to realize what I needed to do, and it was through a lot of support from home, from my wife, and having open and honest discussions with her about the things I've seen and the things that I've been through. But it's not an easy process. It's a difficult process. It's a process of a lot of self-reflection and to increase my self-awareness. And, you know, for cops, at least for me and some other cops that I've talked to, self-reflection is a difficult thing to do because we are always there to solve problems, other people's problems, but while ignoring our own. So it can be a difficult process for that self-reflection. And when you engage in that exploration, I guess I could say, it takes a while, but through support from your family and also making sure you do other things away from the job, whether it's, you know, writing, exercising, camping with your family, fishing, something where we get our mind off of what we do every day. You know, it's a process of, you know, we've become so hyper vigilant that our brain almost becomes hijacked from the job, and we have to make sure we stop that from happening. And the way I've found to stop is to do exactly what I've done. I've written, I've gone back to school, I've I exercised, I camp with my family, something to shut off what can happen every day.
We notice that a lot of first responders, in addition to wanting to be with their family, have a strong desire to be in nature, to be around animals, to be on the water, to be away from technology, away from all of the influence of the world around them. It seems somewhat universal fail-safe to be able to go into those environments and be understimulated as a way to recover in a way. What would you say some of the advantages are of dealing with the wear and tear, recognizing it, in addition to the physical exercise and spending time with others and trying to find joy? What advantages are there to doing some of that difficult introspection that you speak of?
Sure. So, you know, being sound mentally and physically helps us perform at our best. And if those two aren't addressed, then we're not performing. And it can lead to mistakes. It can lead to injuries. It can lead to making the wrong decision. It can lead to a lot of tension at the home. It can lead to divorce. It can lead to substance misuse. I mean, the list goes on and on. It can lead to poor health, cancer, diabetes. So by doing an introspection, by doing a self-examination, it can help us live a healthier life, holistic life. And, you know, the one thing I always say is my goal is when I retire that I bankrupt the state because I lived that long. And by practicing that self-reflection and that self-awareness, then what we can do, we can ensure that we live as long as we can. I mean, we don't know when that time's going to come, but we certainly don't need to speed up the process by letting the job negatively affect us in that way.
Matt, you sound like you might have a little bit of a mental health background, so I'll throw it over to
Right.
Anne.
Matt, and I've asked you this before, but as you've built that bank of experiences, and now you're marrying that with mental health expertise, can you kind of talk about that journey of when you made the decision to take that experience and what you've learned and you know, those good coping skills versus, you know, maladaptive behaviors, and decided to move forward in getting your master's in social work?
Yeah, sure. So, like I said, you know, I was a SWAT operator for a number of years, been around a lot of death, and been in critical incidents. And through that, you know, I wasn't alone. I've had, you know, partners there with me. And I've had friends and colleagues die by suicide. I've had friends and colleagues leave the profession because they weren't able to come out of what we experienced together, what they experienced. And so, years ago, I started discussions with my wife, who is a licensed clinical social worker. And, I was expressing my frustration as to the lack of mental health resources for first responders, for law enforcement specifically. And through those years and years of discussions, in self-reflection, and with encouragement from her, I decided to be part of the solution rather than be the person who's pointing something out but not doing anything about it. So that led me to going back for my master's in social work, and preparing for the next journey, and that is serving those served. Serving the cops that need help with that journey, providing the psychoeducation, providing the resource, providing the help, and really, so it's a lifelong journey. I remember volunteering when I was a kid, but really, it's the experiences I had as a cop, and then through self-reflection and discussions with my wife, that I decided to really be part of a solution and to join forces with First Responder Project and the two of you is a great way to be able to give back to what has been a great career.
Right. And I think that's really an important point, especially as folks are getting ready to look at retirement. And oftentimes it's like, what do I do now? Without having done that pre-planning like you have, and making that transition, while it's not an easy jump to go over that bridge, you've got an idea and a plan, and wanting to give back to your community, which, again, continuing the next mission, call it that selfless service that folks in public service is really one of their chief ethos, and taking those good mental wellness practices and starting to plan, and we really applaud you, Matt, and we certainly appreciate what you and Michelle do on a daily basis. Again, we look forward to partnering with you. What would you, if having a message, what do you want the community to know about the importance of resources and what's needed in the first responder community?
Sure. So really the message is, a healthier first responder, both mentally and physically. But I know we're talking about the mental side. So a healthier first responder mentally makes for a more productive a person, and a person that is performing at their best. And the other thing is, we live a life of service, but we have a whole separate life, like citizens do. We have families, we have kids, we have the same problems that everyone else has. Whether it's budgets, whether it's school, whatever it is, we have the same exact problems that others have. And then we go to work and we wear a particular uniform, or we strap on a gun or a gun belt or whatever it may be, wear a vest, and we're viewed as we're viewed differently, and as if we're robots, and we're not. What we see and what we experience affects us greatly. There's a police psychologist, Ellen Scrivener. She testified in front of Congress that the average officer sees and experiences more tragedy and human despair in the first 3 years of their career than an average citizen sees in a lifetime. So if you can imagine that, the average officer in the first 3 years is carrying around the weight of the world, and we owe it to them. We owe it to all first responders to care for them. They are they live a similar life to the military. It's just over a 30-year career instead of a, whatever it may be, a couple tours or maybe 8 years or something like that. And first responders, they're on duty every day for 30 years, whether in uniform or out of uniform. So it takes a great toll. So we owe it to them to care for them, to provide them resources, to provide mental health, to keep them the best they can be, because we want them to be the best they can be out in the streets, protecting and taking care of everyone.
Right.
And that's really the message that I like to leave with everybody.
Right. And, it takes me back to being a medical service corps officer. And our motto was to preserve the fighting strength. And I think, that takeaway of, taking care of those that take care of us. And I applaud, you and Michelle in moving it forward. And so, again, thank you, Matt, for, all you do. And I will personally say I'm going to be at your graduation, invited or not.
You
It might be on Zoom, but come on.
Okay.
You are definitely in a unique and really wonderful position to be able to affect the lives of first responders who are always looking for, just as our military folks are always looking for someone who gets it, and to have walked the walk and then and then switch hats and to be dual hatted essentially is essential. And you in your profession have learned not only about the more acute stress responses like being hypervigilant or situationally aware, and the impact of nightmares and things like that, but also things like moral injury and soul injury, which are unfortunately are not things that we readily talk about and discuss, but are part and parcel of the line of work. So we do look forward to partnering more with you in the future.
Yeah.
And thank you for taking the time to be with us tonight, especially late on an evening. I know our listeners are learning a lot today. And for those who have just dialed in this evening, you are welcome to listen to the earlier show we had at between 10 a.m. and 1 p.m. today. That is going to be posted on the 904 Now, of course. And the video section, if you search First Responder Project, you'll find that. We are also going to post segments of this on the firstresponderproject.org website. That is also where you can find opportunities to get involved with us, to contact us, reach out, whether, again, it be in-kind donation, any kind of support that you are willing to give. Our fundraiser is, again, focused 100% of donations going directly to services for first responders, whether it be retreats, outreach training, and the like. We would like to express special thanks again to Pete Melfi, who's behind our numerous screens here. We can't even see him right now. We get a thumbs up. Pete has been incredibly gracious with his time and expertise. We would like to thank our sponsor, Jerry Falcomer with Old City Homes. We would like, of course, to thank all of our interviewees for their belief and support of First Responder Project's mission and of each other, and for our listeners for being vested citizens in supporting those who serve. So with that, we will end our time. Anne, any final thoughts?
No, I just want to give a big shout out to Pete and his generosity and his expertise for somebody that's definitely, technology challenged. And again, all of the first responders and the family members who gave of their time and talent to help educate and really speak to the community about what our first responders do for us and with us. And I'd like to thank my partner in crime, Tracy Himanowski. Her dedication and passion for this is palpable. And we'd really like to do a retreat January of 2021. So any help, or financial assistance or in kind, even a facility would be great. We'd appreciate it, and just to give something back to those that do so much for us on a daily basis.
And thank you, Anne Johnson. Appreciate you. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.